The council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And Ambassador Chen Okoi walked its length with practiced humility, her boots making no sound on the impossible surface that the Vex 3 had grown over 17,000 years above. Or floated the council itself, 12 species arranged in tiers of power and prestige like a pyramid of ancient authority, with humanity occupying the lowest ring alongside 6 other junior civilizations, who had been junior for anywhere from 80 to 400 standard years. Chen reached her designated spot and waited, standing while the elder species remained in their gravitational suspension fields. Another small reminder that some beings earned the right to rest while others did not. The human delegation recognizes the wisdom of the council, she said in Galactic Standard, the phrase that began every session. The words that stuck in her throat more each year. The luminaries spoke first, as they always did, their voice like wind through crystal caves. We acknowledge humanity's presence and grant permission to hear the concerns of Earth and her colonies. There were no concerns. Not officially, because raising concerns meant questioning the council's wisdom. And questioning wisdom meant being labeled immature and possibly losing what few privileges humanity had managed to accumulate over 127 years of perfect obedience. Humanity thanks the council for their guidance, Chun replied. And she watched the ritual continue as it had every month for longer than she had been alive. Chromath presented their military reports. Massive beings whose bodies were 60% muscle and 40% arrogance from what Chun could tell. And they detailed how council forces had secured another border region against what they called chaos. Species civilizations that refused to accept council authority and were therefore obstacles to galactic peace. Chen had read the classified reports that humanity's intelligence services had managed to obtain. The ones that showed these chaos species were often just populations who wanted to govern themselves without council interference. But she said nothing because humanity had learned long ago that truth was less important than survival. The Vex 3 announced new regulations on information technology, restricting quantum computing research to mature species only, which meant the same 5 civilizations that had dominated the council for 10,000 years. And Chun made a note on her datapad even though she knew the human scientists who had been working on quantum breakthroughs would have to abandon 2 decades of research. Then came the part she had been dreading. Counselor Vex 3 Prime, a being that looked like geometry given consciousness and malice, addressed the lower tier. The council has determined that galactic security requires additional resource allocation from all member species, proportional to their industrial capacity. Chun felt her jaw tighten. Humanity will increase its antimatter production quota from 22% to 40% of total output. The Vex 3 continued, and will provide 200,000 military conscripts for assignment to border security operations within 90 days. 40%. Chun thought 40% of everything humanity produced from their antimatter facilities, the ones they had built with their own resources and their own ingenuity, now handed over to fuel council ships that humanity would never be allowed to build themselves, and 200,000 people, mostly young, mostly with their whole lives ahead of them, sent to fight in wars they hadn't started for borders that weren't theirs. Does the human delegation consent? The luminary asked, and Chun knew the question was purely ceremonial because no was not an option that junior species possessed. She opened her mouth and felt the weight of 127 years of compliance pressing down on her shoulders. Generations of humans who had bent and bowed and scraped because they believed that patience would earn them respect, and good behavior would earn them equality. Humanity consents to the council's wisdom, she heard herself say, and the words tasted like ash. The session continued for another 2 hours as the council discussed trade route allocations that favored elder species and technology sharing, agreements that only flowed upward and diplomatic, assignments that placed humans in positions of maximum exposure and minimum authority when it finally ended and Chun returned to human embassy, a converted cargo station in the cheapest orbital zone around the Council homeworld. She found her deputy Marcus waiting with reports from across human space. How bad? She asked. The Perseverance mining station is running at 140% capacity, trying to meet the new quotas, Marcus said, scrolling through data on his tablet. New Columbia is facing food shortages because we had to divert our agricultural vessels to council supply runs. And the Medical Corps is reporting that 3 colony clinics have closed because all their advanced equipment was requisitioned for council research facilities. Chun poured herself a glass of water with hands that shook slightly. And the conscription? Resistance on 15 worlds, Marcus replied quietly. Nothing organized, just parents hiding their children. Young people fleeing to outer colonies. That sort of thing. Tell the planetary governors to cooperate fully, Chun said, hating herself. We can't afford to be labeled non-compliant. Marcus looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Ma'am, permission to speak freely? Always. How much longer are we going to do this? He asked, and his voice carried exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. How much more are we going to give them before there's nothing left of us to give? Chun walked to the window and looked out at the council homeworld below. Its surface covered in structures that had stood for millennia while human civilization had barely made it off Earth before nearly destroying itself. And she understood why the council saw humanity as children who needed guidance, but she also remembered her grandmother's stories about the occupation, about how people could endure almost anything if they believed submission was temporary, but how something broke inside them when they realized the cage was permanent. I don't know, she admitted. I honestly don't know. That night, Chun couldn't sleep. So she accessed the human historical archives and read about every revolution, every rebellion, every moment when people had decided that survival wasn't worth the price of dignity. She read about the ones that succeeded and the ones that failed, and the ones that fell somewhere in between. And she realized that they all had one thing in common. Someone had to be willing to say the word that changed everything. Someone had to say no. The next morning, she received a message from Commander Webb at the Perseverance station, and when she opened it, she saw a man who looked 10 years older than his service record indicated, standing in front of his crew. And behind him were the workers who kept the galaxy running while getting none of the credit. Webb's message was simple. How much more, Ambassador? How much more do we give before we're allowed to be equals? Chum sat at her desk for a long time, staring at that question. And then she began to draft a response that she knew would change everything. But before she could send it, reports started flooding in from across human space, unauthorized broadcasts, spontaneous demonstrations, labor strikes at facilities that the council depended on, and everywhere the same question being asked in 1,000 different ways. How much more? Chun realized that the decision had already been made. Not by her, but by millions of humans who had independently reached the same conclusion. And her role now was not to lead them toward rebellion, but to give voice to what they had already decided. She opened the secure channel to every human colonial governor, every fleet commander, every station chief, and began with 3 words she had never said in an official capacity: prepare for withdrawal. Commander Marcus Webb stood in the observation deck of the mining station Perseverance and watched his crew work themselves to exhaustion in the antimatter containment facility below, their shifts running 16 hours now instead of the regulation. Because quotas didn't care about human limitations, the station floated at the edge of the Kepler Reach, a region of space so dense with exotic particles that it required constant shielding adjustments and carried a cancer risk that the Council considered acceptable for junior species operations, which meant acceptable for humans and nobody else. Webb had commanded Perseverance for 8 years, and in that time he had watched his crew grow hollow-eyed and bent-shouldered from work that enriched civilizations who wouldn't let them drink from the same water fountains on Council worlds. His lead engineer Sarah Chun, no relation to the ambassador, ran the antimatter extraction systems with an efficiency that would have earned her a department head position on any Council facility. But because she was human, she was classified as a technical assistant and paid 40% of what a Vex 3 doing the same job would make. Sarah had a daughter named Maya, 12 years old, bright enough to qualify for the advanced education programs that the Council ran for promising youth from developing species. Except that every year Maya applied, and every year she was rejected for reasons that were never quite specified. 3 weeks ago, Maya had started showing symptoms of neural degradation syndrome, a condition caused by long-term exposure to antimatter radiation, the kind of exposure that happened when you grew up on a mining station because your parents couldn't afford housing anywhere else. Sarah had taken Maya to the medical facility on Vex 3 Station 7, the closest advanced medical center, because human clinics didn't have the equipment to treat. NDS and the Council's technology-sharing restrictions meant they never would. Vex 3 doctors had examined Maya for approximately 4 minutes before informing Sarah that treatment was available, but restricted to civilizations with demonstrated medical maturity, and that humans should focus on preventive measures rather than expecting access to advanced interventions. Sarah had begged. And when begging didn't work, she had offered to pay triple the standard rate, and when that didn't work, she had tried to explain that her daughter was dying, and didn't the Council's stated mission include promoting health and welfare for all species? The doctors had been very polite as they explained that allowing immature species access to advanced medical technology before they were ready could lead to dependency and stunted development. And wasn't it better for humanity to learn to solve their own problems? Maya had died 6 days later in the Perseverance medical bay, while human doctors did everything they could with equipment that was 3 generations out of date. Webb had attended the memorial service and watched Sarah stand over her daughter's recycling pod with eyes that had gone somewhere beyond grief into a territory that scared him, because he recognized it from his own mirror that was 5 days ago. Now Webb stood in the observation deck and received reports from across human space that painted the same picture in different colors. A colony on New Columbia where people were rationing food because their agricultural ships had been requisitioned. A research station where human scientists had discovered a new power generation method, only to have it classified and seized within 24 hours. A military unit where human soldiers had been used to clear a minefield by walking through it because Council forces were too valuable to risk. His communications officer interrupted his thoughts. "Commander, we're receiving an unauthorized transmission from the mining station New Prospect. They're broadcasting on open channels." Webb frowned because unauthorized transmissions were the kind of thing that got stations shut down and crews arrested. "What are they saying?" The officer looked uncomfortable. "It's a question, sir. How much more?" Webb felt something shift in his chest. "Are they asking us or broadcasting to everyone?" "Everyone, sir. They're transmitting to every human facility in range. Within an hour." 17 other stations had picked up the question and were repeating it, and Webb knew he should shut down the transmission and report the violation to Council authorities, because that was what loyal members of the galactic community did instead. He walked down to the engineering bay where Sarah was working a double shift because someone had to, and found her recalibrating a containment field with the mechanical precision of someone who had forgotten how to feel. "Sarah, I need you to stop for a minute," he said. She didn't look up. "Can't, Commander. Quotas don't stop." "Sarah, please." She finally turned, and he saw that her eyes were red but dry. like she had run out of tears somewhere around day 3. "What do you need?" "Sir, I need to know what you want," Webb said. "Not what the council wants, not what regulations require, what you want." Sarah laughed, and it was the saddest sound Webb had ever heard. "I want my daughter back, but since that's not possible, I want to know why we keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Pretending that if we work hard enough and follow enough rules and smile enough at people who treat us like we're less than them, that someday they'll decide we've earned the right to be treated like equals," Sarah said, and her voice was perfectly calm, which somehow made it worse. Maya believed that, she thought if she studied hard enough and was good enough that the council would see she deserved a chance. And look where that got her. Webb made a decision that he knew would probably end his career. "If you could send a message to every human in council space, what would you say?" Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "I'd ask them how much more they're willing to lose. Then let's ask them." Webb said 6 hours later, Commander Marcus Webb stood in front of a camera in his ready room and recorded a message that he transmitted to every human station, colony, and ship he could reach. And in it he told Maya's story and Sarah's story and the story of every human who had given everything they had only to be told it wasn't enough. He ended with the question that was already spreading across human space: how much more? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages flooded in from miners and engineers and scientists and soldiers and colonists. And they all told variations of the same story about working harder for less, about being denied dignity, about watching their children inherit a system designed to keep them subordinate. Forever Ambassador Chun received the reports aboard the council station and knew that the moment she had been preparing for had arrived. And she opened a channel to every human authority in the galaxy. "We have 90 days to prepare," she said. "After that, we stop asking permission." The council noticed the unrest, of course, and the luminary summoned Chun to a private meeting in a chamber that was deliberately kept cold because humans found it uncomfortable, and discomfort reminded junior species of their place. "Your people are experiencing adjustment difficulties," the luminary said with what might have been concern or might have been contempt. It was hard to tell with beings made of living light. "This is normal for developing civilizations. They must learn that maturity requires sacrifice." Chun stood in the cold room and thought about Maya and about the 200,000 young people who would be conscripted and about all the humans who had sacrificed and sacrificed and sacrificed for the promise that someday it would matter. And when does the sacrificing end? She asked. "When do we get to be equals instead of children?" The luminary made a sound like wind chimes in a storm. "When you have proven yourselves ready, as all species must. The Council has guided the galaxy for 10,000 years and will guide it for 10,000 more. This is the natural order. And if we disagree with the natural order," the luminary's light flickered in what might have been surprise, "then you would be acting against galactic peace and prosperity. Surely humanity does not wish to be labeled as a chaos species?" Chum thought about her grandmother and about rebellions and about the price of dignity. "We wish to be labeled as equals, and if you can't give us that, then we'll take it." She walked out before the luminary could respond, and she knew that she had just declared a war that humanity might not survive, but she also knew that surviving as permanent children wasn't really surviving at all. Message went out that night to every human colony and station and ship. In 90 days, we withdraw our consent, and across human space, millions of people who had been waiting for someone to say it, who had been carrying the question in their hearts, who had been wondering if they were alone in their anger, finally heard the answer. They weren't alone, they were done, and in 90 days, the galaxy would learn what happened when you pushed humans past the point where patience turned to power. The countdown began at 90 days, and the Council spent the first 30 of those days not believing that humanity was serious because in 10,000 years of galactic governance, no junior species had ever actually followed through on a threat to withdraw. The Vex 3 analyzed human communication patterns and concluded that this was simply an emotional outburst that would fade once the humans remembered their place in the natural order of things. The Chromoth prepared military exercises near human space as a reminder of what happened to civilizations that forgot the value of council protection. The Luminari composed carefully worded statements about the importance of patience and the dangers of premature independence, and humanity prepared for the largest coordinated action in their species history. In the human embassy on the council homeworld, Ambassador Chun worked 20-hour days coordinating with colonial governors, fleet commanders, station chiefs, and resistance cells that had existed in secret for decades, waiting for exactly this moment, because the truth that the council had never understood was that humanity's compliance had never been acceptance. It had been preparation. Had bought time to build shipyards in unmonitored space, to develop weapons that council regulations forbade, to establish supply chains that didn't depend on council approval, to create networks of loyalty that ran deeper than any oath to the Galactic Order. Chen's deputy, Marcus, had spent 15 years quietly mapping every system where humans worked in council infrastructure, cataloging every critical position that depended on human expertise, identifying every bottleneck that would collapse if human labor disappeared. The list was staggering. Humans maintained 70% of the council's power grid because the work was tedious and dangerous and required the kind of stubborn persistence that elder species considered beneath them. Humans ran the logistics networks that kept food and medicine flowing to 1,000 worlds because the calculations were complex and the errors were blamed on whoever was doing the shipping rather than whoever was doing the planning. Humans served in the support roles of council military units, handling everything from maintenance to medical care to communications, because glory went to those who fought, while necessity went to those who enabled the fighting. The council had built their civilization on the assumption that there would always be younger species willing to do the essential work that kept everything running. And they had never considered what would happen if those species simply stopped. Day 60 arrived, and Chun transmitted the final orders, encrypted in a code that used human literature as its key, because the council had never bothered to study human culture deeply enough to break it on day 0. Every human in council space would receive a simple message: come home, and they would walk away. The Vex 3 monitoring human communications detected increased chatter, but couldn't decode the content and assumed it was just continued grumbling from a species that would ultimately fall in line like all the others. Day 30 came and went, and the council began to worry. Not because they believed humanity would actually withdraw, but because the unrest was spreading to other junior species who were asking uncomfortable questions about quotas and representation and equality. The Chromoth suggested a military demonstration, something overwhelming enough to remind everyone why council protection was valuable. The Luminari advised patience, confident that humanity would see reason once they contemplated the alternatives. The Vex 3 ran probability models that all concluded human withdrawal was economically irrational and therefore unlikely. None of them considered that humans might choose dignity over economic stay. 0 arrived on a Tuesday, Galactic Standard Time, at 0600 hours across every time zone where humans lived and worked in the power stations that kept council worlds running. Human engineers completed their shifts, logged their work with unusual thoroughness, and walked out in the logistics centers that coordinated shipping across 100 worlds. Human traffic controllers handed their headsets to confused Vex 3 supervisors and explained that the shift was over in military bases across Council space. Human support staff uploaded detailed instructions for maintaining the equipment they had been operating, sent their regards to their commanding officers, and left in research facilities where human scientists had been working on Council projects. The humans packed their personal belongings, copied their own research notes, and departed in shipyards and factories and administrative offices and medical centers and communications hubs and every other place where humans had been doing the work that kept civilization functioning. They stopped and they went home. The Council's initial response was confusion, because surely this was some kind of coordinated break time and the humans would return after making their point, but humans didn't return by hour 6. Power failures cascaded across the Council homeworld as maintenance systems that humans had been monitoring failed, and nobody else knew how to repair them by hour 12. Shipping routes began to snarl as logistics networks optimized by human calculators collapsed into chaos by day 2. Military units reported critical supply shortages as the support chains they had taken for granted simply ceased to function by day 4. The Council convened an emergency session to address what the Vex 3 were calling the human problem, though it was becoming increasingly clear that the problem was not the humans, but the Council's dependence on them. Ambassador Chun, still on the Council homeworld, appeared before them one final time. "You demanded our labor, and we gave it," she said. "You demanded our resources, and we provided them. You demanded our children for your wars, and we sent them. You demanded our obedience, and we offered it for 127 years. The luminary tried to interrupt, but Chun continued, her voice carrying across the crystal chamber with a force that surprised even her. "But you never understood that our compliance was a choice, not a mandate. You never considered that we might simply choose differently. You have no right to abandon your responsibilities to galactic order," the Vex 3 said, their geometric form pulsing with what might have been anger. "We have every right to withdraw consent from a system that treats us as permanent subordinates." Chun replied, "You want to know what humanity is doing? We're going home. We're rebuilding our civilization without you. We're raising our children in a place where their worth isn't determined by how old their species is. This is rebellion," the Chromoth growled, their massive form leaning forward threateningly. "This is resignation," Chun corrected. "We're not fighting you, we're leaving you. There's a difference. The Council will not permit this," the luminary declared. Chen smiled without humor. "The Council doesn't have a choice. You built your civilization on our backs and told yourselves it was for our own good. Now you get to run it yourselves." She turned and walked toward the exit, knowing that she was probably starting a war, but also knowing that some things were worth fighting for. Behind her, the Council chamber erupted in arguments as the elder species began to grasp the full scope of what was happening across the galaxy. Human ships were forming defensive perimeters around human systems, deploying weapons that the Council had forbidden and that humans had built anyway, activating shield networks that shouldn't have existed and jamming technologies that violated every treaty humanity had signed in secret shipyards, hidden in asteroid fields and gas giants. Vessels that had been constructed over decades began to power up, crewed by volunteers who had trained in secret, armed with weapons designed by scientists who had never stopped thinking about what freedom might cost. Commander Webb aboard the Perseverance coordinated the withdrawal of 300 mining stations, their antimatter reserves loaded onto human ships rather than delivered to Council facilities, their expertise returning to human space where it would serve human interests. Sarah Chun, the engineer who had lost her daughter, worked alongside him, and when someone asked if she was afraid of what came next, she replied that she had already lost everything that mattered, and now she was fighting to make sure no other parent had to. Exodus took 3 weeks to complete, as humans fled Council space by the millions, abandoning infrastructure they had built, and cities they'd helped grow, and friends they had made among the other junior species who watched with a mixture of envy and fearsome. Elder species moved to block the withdrawal, demanding that humans fulfill their contracts and honor their obligations. Human fleet commanders responded with a simple message: "We're leaving peacefully. Don't make us leave any other way." Most stood aside. The Chromoth did not at the border of human space. 10,000 Chromoth warships assembled in a formation that was meant to intimidate, a demonstration of overwhelming force that was supposed to remind humanity of their place. Admiral Jessica Rodriguez, commanding the human defense fleet from the carrier Indomitable, watched them gather and felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was it. The moment when peaceful withdrawal became something else. She opened a channel to all human ships. "Remember what we're fighting for. Remember Maya-chan. Remember every human who died or suffered because we weren't allowed to be equals. And remember that we're not asking for permission anymore." The Chromoth fleet advanced and humanity prepared to chasse. Admiral Jessica Rodriguez had spent 30 years in the human fleet, following Council protocols and fighting Council-approved battles with Council-approved tactics. And she had learned exactly what the Chromoth would do because they had been doing the same thing for 10,000 years. The Chromoth battle formation was called the Hegemon Sphere, a three-dimensional arrangement of warships that allowed overlapping fields of fire while maintaining structural integrity through gravity-linked shields. And it was considered unbreakable because in 10,000 years, nobody had broken it. The Chromoth fleet came through the border zone in perfect formation, 10,000 ships moving as one, their commanders broadcasting the traditional challenge that demanded humanity surrender or face annihilation. Rodriguez watched from the bridge of the Indomitable and felt a strange calm settle over all ships. She transmitted on the human fleet channel, "Activate Protocol Exodus" around her. 3,000 human vessels powered up systems that the Council had forbidden, weapons that violated every treaty humanity had signed, technologies that the Vexteri had classified as inappropriate for developing species. The Chromoth had never considered that humanity might ignore the rules. The first wave wasn't missiles or energy weapons, but something simpler and more terrible: relativistic kill vehicles. Chunks of dense matter accelerated to 98% of light speed and aimed at the Chromoth formation with calculations that had taken human computers 6 months to perfect. The Chromoth shields were designed to deflect energy weapons and absorb missile impacts, but they had never been tested against kinetic projectiles carrying enough force to crack a Moon 7. RKVs struck the Hegemon Sphere before the Chromoth could react, and the result was catastrophic. Ships disintegrated, gravity links collapsed, and the perfect formation shattered into chaos. Rodriguez didn't celebrate because she knew this was just the beginning. Second wave. "Deploy the swarms," she ordered. From human carriers emerged clouds of autonomous drones. Thousands of small craft controlled by artificial intelligence networks that the Council had banned as existentially dangerous, and that humans had developed anyway. The drones didn't fly like ships. They moved like insects, swarming and adapting and targeting weak points with a speed that organic commanders couldn't match. The Chromoth tried to reform their lines, but the swarms disrupted every attempt, attacking power conduits and sensor arrays and communication nodes with surgical precision. Commander Webb, aboard the Perseverance, now designated a support carrier, watched the battle unfold on tactical displays while coordinating supply lines that kept the human fleet operational. "How are we doing this?" his navigation officer asked. "We're outnumbered 3-1. "Because we're not fighting their war," Webb replied. "We're fighting ours." The Chromoth had expected honor combat. Ship against ship, strength against strength, the kind of warfare where their superior numbers and firepower would inevitably win. Instead, humanity used every advantage that desperation and a century of preparation had given them. They hacked into Chromoth battle networks using backdoors that human engineers had installed decades ago during routine maintenance, when they had been the trusted servants keeping council systems running. They weaponized the gravity wells around gas giants, collapsing space-time in ways that trapped Chromoth ships light years from resupply. They deployed electromagnetic pulse weapons that fried electronics through supposedly impenetrable shielding. They fought dirty, and they fought smart, and they fought like people who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Sarah Chun, working in the engineering bay of the Perseverance, monitored power flow to the drone control systems and thought about her daughter every time she routed more energy the weapons that were killing people who had called themselves humanity's protectors. Someone asked if she felt guilty, and she replied that she felt nothing but determination to make sure Maya's death had meaning. The battle raged for 6 days. Chronoth kept expecting humanity to fight like a proper military, to follow conventions and honor traditions, and eventually submit when the mathematics of war became unfavorable. But humanity had learned from watching every council conflict over 100 years. They had studied Chromoth tactics and Vex theory strategies and Luminari doctrines, and they had concluded that the Council's way of war was designed for civilizations that could afford to lose. Humans couldn't afford to lose. So they didn't play fair. On day 4, the Chromoth attempted a massive push, concentrating their remaining 7,000 ships in a hammer blow designed to break the human defensive line through sheer force. Rodriguez saw it coming, and instead of meeting force with force, she did something the Chromoth had never encountered. She retreated, pulling the entire human fleet back through a network of spatial anomalies that human navigators had mapped over decades. The Chromoth followed, seeing weakness, and found themselves in a region of space where human ships had pre-positioned weapons platforms and mines and automated defense systems that turned the pursuit into a massacre. 1,000 Chromoth ships died in the trap, and the rest finally understood that they weren't fighting children anymore. On day 6, the Chromoth commander requested negotiations. Rodriguez met him in virtual space, her avatar facing his massive armored form across a simulated conference room. "You fight without honor," the Chromoth said, and his voice carried genuine confusion. "This is not warfare. This is treachery. This is survival," Rodriguez replied. "You brought 10,000 ships to slaughter us for having the audacity to leave. Did you expect us to die politely? We expected you to know your place. Our place is wherever we choose to stand," Rodriguez said. "And we choose to stand alone rather than kneel forever." The Chromoth commander was silent for a long moment. "What are your terms? Leave our space, leave us alone, and tell the Council that humanity is done taking orders. The Council will never accept this. The Council doesn't have a choice," Rodriguez said. And she transmitted data that made the Chromoth commander's avatar flicker with shock. It was everything. Every secret the Council had kept, every lie they had told, every exploitation they had committed against junior species for 10,000 years. Human intelligence services had spent decades collecting it, copying it from systems they maintained, extracting it from networks they operated, gathering evidence of the Council's true nature. "We're sending this to every species in the galaxy," Rodriguez said. "Every civilization that the Council calls junior will see what you really think of them. Every species you've exploited will know the truth. This will destroy galactic order." "Good," Rodriguez replied. "Because galactic order was built on our subjugation." The transmission went out simultaneously to 10,000 worlds, broadcast in every known language. distributed through networks that the Council couldn't shut down because humans had built them and humans knew how to use them. Ambassador Chun, watching from human space, saw the reactions ripple across the galaxy in real time. Younger species erupted in fury as they read communications showing Council leaders discussing them like livestock. The elder species scrambled to deny and contain, but the evidence was irrefutable. The Vexthari had written extensively about their plans to keep junior species dependent forever. Luminari had discussed acceptable casualties among populations they claimed to protect. The Chromath had debated which species would be easiest to conscript for dangerous operations, and through it all was the same theme: junior species existed to serve elder species, and the system was designed to ensure that never changed. 16 civilizations immediately announced their withdrawal from the Council. When more demanded reforms, the galactic order that had stood for 10,000 years began to crack on the battlefield. The Chromath fleet limped away, 60% destroyed, their pride shattered. Their certainty gone. Commander Webb watched them go and felt Sarah come to stand beside him. "Is it over?" she asked. "The battle is," he replied. "But what comes next? That's up to us." Because humanity had won the right to exist on their own terms. But winning the right was different from knowing what to do with it. Rodriguez transmitted to all human ships: stand down from combat status, maintain defensive positions, and prepare for the hard part. Someone asked what the hard part was, and she replied, "Building something better than what we left behind." The galaxy was watching, and humanity would have to prove that freedom was about more than just the right to say no. They would have to show that they could say yes to something worth building. 6 months after the battle that shattered the Chromath fleet and exposed the Council's true nature, Ambassador Chen stood in a conference chamber that looked nothing like the crystal grandeur of the old Council halls. This room was simple, circular, with chairs arranged in a ring around a table that had no head, because hierarchy was the thing they were trying to leave behind. Representatives from 37 species sat in those chairs, some who had withdrawn from the Council and some who had never joined, and some who were Council species that had broken away after seeing what their civilization had become. They called it the Accord of Equals, and the name alone would have made the old Council laugh. Because how could species of different ages and capabilities be truly equal? But humanity had learned something during their century of subjugation. Equality wasn't about being the same. It was about being valued the same. Chun looked around the circle and saw the Chromath delegate, a young warrior named Keth, who represented a reform movement that had overthrown the old War Council after the battle. She saw the Vexthari scientist who had leaked classified documents that helped expose the Council's corruption. She saw delegates from species humanity had never heard of because the Council had kept them isolated and dependent. "We need to establish voting procedures," said the representative from Talax Prime, a species that had been junior for 300 years. "How do we make decisions when we all get equal say?" "Consensus when possible," Chun suggested. "Majority vote when necessary. And any decision that affects one species more than others requires their explicit consent. That will be slow." The Vexthari scientist pointed out. "Democracy usually is," Chun agreed. "But it's better than the alternative." The Chromath delegate Keth spoke up, his voice carrying the rumble of his species, but without the old arrogance. "My people are struggling with this concept. We were taught that strength determines authority, that the strong guide the weak. How do we reconcile equality with different capabilities?" Chun considered the question carefully, because she knew it was the same one that would destroy the Accord if they didn't answer it right. "My species has a saying," she replied. "Different doesn't mean lesser. You might be stronger than me physically, and I might be better at diplomacy than you. That doesn't make either of us superior." It means we contribute different things of equal value. But what about species that contribute less? Another delegate asked, what about civilizations that need more help than they can give? Then we help them, Chan said simply. Not because they owe us or because we're establishing dominance, but because that's what you do when you're part of a community rather than an empire. The discussion continued for hours and then days and then weeks, because building something new was harder than tearing down something old. Meanwhile, across human space, the work of reconstruction began. Commander Webb oversaw the conversion of military shipyards into civilian manufacturing centers because humanity needed ships for exploration and trade more than they needed weapons. Now Sarah Chen led a team developing medical technology that humans would share freely with other species because she wanted to make sure no one else lost a child the way she had. Admiral Rodriguez coordinated with other species militaries to create a mutual defense pact based on cooperation rather than subordination, and everywhere humans worked alongside species that the Council had kept separated, learning that the galaxy was richer and stranger and more interesting than they had been allowed to know. Not everything was smooth. The Luminari and the remaining Council species retreated into their core territories, refusing to acknowledge the Accord and maintaining that they represented true galactic civilization. Some Chromath factions rejected the reforms and continued raiding border worlds in the name of traditional honor. Pirates and warlords took advantage of the chaos to carve out their own territories, but the Accord held together because the species within it had all experienced what happened when power concentrated at the top, and they were determined to try something different. Chun received a message from the Council 1 year after the Exodus, an offer to negotiate humanity's return under revised circumstances that would grant them certain privileges. She read it to the Accord Assembly and asked for their input. What do you think? Keth asked. Is it a genuine offer? It doesn't matter, Chun replied, because we're not going back. We left to build something better, and that's what we're doing. She sent her response. Humanity appreciates the Council's offer, but we have found that we prefer the company of equals to the guidance of elders. We wish you well in your future endeavors. The Vex Theory scientist, whose name was approximately translated as Geometric Thought 7, but who had asked everyone to call him 7, approached Chen after the session. Do you think this will work? He asked. The Accord, this experiment in equality, do you think it can last? Chen looked at him and saw genuine worry in whatever passed for his expression. I don't know, she admitted. But I know the alternative doesn't work. I know that systems based on permanent hierarchy eventually collapse under their own corruption. So we might as well try something that gives everyone a chance, even if it fails. Especially if it fails, Chun said, because at least we'll fail trying to do something right instead of succeeding at perpetuating something wrong. 3 years after the Exodus, the Accord had grown to include 83 species and had established trade networks, mutual defense agreements, and technology-sharing programs that operated on principles of reciprocity rather than extraction. Human children grew up learning about species the Council had kept hidden and hearing stories about the day their ancestors said enough. Maya Chan became a symbol. Her story told across the Accord as a reminder of why equality mattered and why systems that valued some lives over others could never be trusted. Sarah built a medical center named for her daughter, where doctors from a dozen species worked together to develop treatments that were shared freely across the Accord. Webb retired from the military and became a civilian administrator, helping former mining stations transition to research facilities where humans and other species studied the universe together. Rodriguez continued to command the human fleet, but now it was part of a larger alliance where no species had supreme authority, and every member contributed according to their ability. And Chun, 5 years after walking out of the council chamber, stood in front of a new generation of human students and told them about the day humanity stopped asking permission. "Were you scared?" One of them asked. "Terrified," Chun admitted. "But we were more scared of what would happen if we didn't act. We were scared of becoming so comfortable with submission that we forgot how to stand." "Do you think the council will ever change?" "Maybe," Chun said. "Some of their species have joined us. Some have started reform movements. Change is possible if enough people demand it." "And what about us?" Another student asked. "What do we do now that we're free?" Chun smiled. "Now comes the hard part. We build the kind of galaxy we want to live in. We make sure that no species has to choose between dignity and survival the way we did. We prove that cooperation works better than domination. And if we fail, then we learn and we try again," Chun replied. "Because that's what free people do. They make their own mistakes and learn their own lessons instead of having someone else's truth imposed on them." That night, Chun received a message from an unexpected source, the Luminary Counselor who had presided over humanity's last session in the old council. The message was simple. "We are watching your experiment with interest. Perhaps we were wrong about some things. Perhaps there is wisdom and perspectives we dismissed as immature. The council is changing slowly because of what you showed us was possible." Chun didn't respond immediately because she wasn't sure if this was genuine reflection or political maneuvering. But eventually, she wrote back. "Change is always possible if you're willing to admit you need it. The accord is here if you ever decide that cooperation is better than control. We'll welcome you as equals." 10 years after the Exodus, a colony ship left human space, headed for unexplored regions beyond any council or accord. Territor Chun watched it depart from the observation deck of Unity Station and thought about everything humanity had lost and gained. They had lost the security of knowing their place, the comfort of having decisions made for them, the simplicity of following orders. They had gained the burden of self-determination, the challenge of making mistakes, the responsibility of freedom, and somehow, impossibly, it was worth it. A young Chromath approached her, one of the children born after the reforms, raised in the Accord rather than the old council. Ambassador Chun, the child said with the careful pronunciation of someone learning human speech. "My teacher told us you were there when everything changed. What was it like?" Chun thought about crystal chambers and dead children, and the moment she decided that survival without dignity wasn't survival at all, it was necessary, she said finally. "And it was terrifying, and it was the best thing we ever did. Because you got freedom? Because we claimed it?" Chun corrected gently. "Freedom isn't something you get. It's something you take. And then you have to build something worth having with it. The young Chromath considered this. And did you?" Buell,